I learned a lot, and I grew a lot under him and as an athlete. Fortunately, my family moved, and I ended up moving to New Mexico, and I met a very great coach. Unique coach, totally different than what I was accustomed to in Colorado with the high miles and long intervals and all those kind of things. This coach did things a little bit different. And that's kind of molded me as a person. He cared more about me as an individual, more about what I was doing than what I could do for him. And I felt when I was in Colorado, it was more like, what could I do for him, the coach? Well, this guy was, what could he do for me? Miles didn't matter to him, but what mattered to him was me as a person, and what mattered to him is what he could teach me. And he was full of great knowledge. And that's kind of what I put my philosophy of coaching around. It's a little bit after his style. His style was unique. We were on the track every day. We did interval work every day. Miles, hardly any miles. My miles were warming up and cooling down. You know, I'd warm up with a mile, cool down with a mile, and my dad came to me one day and said, "You think you're doing enough miles?" I don't know. He said, "Well, why don't you try warming up with 2 miles and cooling down with 2 miles? Let's see if that helps your mileage a little bit." So I started doing that. It helped my mileage, but it didn't matter to him. Miles just didn't matter to him. What mattered to him was my mental aspect, my mental frame of mind, how I approached my race, and if I executed my race the way he wanted me to execute it, which is very important to him. As soon as I started being coached by him, he told me how he wanted me to run the race. And before I got to him, I was a decent half miler. I think I ran 156. And I ran a mile. Back then it was actually the mile. And it was actually a half mile, 880. So I'm dating myself a little bit. So I actually ran a mile, and if you equate it, you got to go with altitude because I ran at altitude. But I actually ran a 4:21 mile at altitude as a sophomore in high school. So if you equate that down, 6 seconds, 1 second per mile per 1,000 feet. So probably about 4:15, 4:16 mile. Take another second and a half off that, somewhere in the 4:14. So that's what I ran when I was in Colorado. But I just ran it. My coach in Colorado just was all brute strength. You do the miles, you run your intervals hard enough. His philosophy was, if you don't leave this track, at least throw it up once a week, you're not working hard enough. So we'd go over in the corner, stick our fingers down our throat, make sure we But no, it was serious. He was serious about it. And there were many times that I now call it the half-mile hangover. You leave the track with this headache, and the only way you can actually relieve it when it goes to your stomach is to actually throw up. But I experienced that many times in my career, and a lot when I was in high school, coaching for him, being coached under him. But when I went to New Mexico with this other coach, it was totally different. I never really felt as though I had to be carried off the track after a workout. I left the track going, I want to do more. I left the track going, I can do better than what I did today. So I always came back the next day just excited. And he taught me how to run correctly. He taught me how to run a race. And we practiced that in workouts. He would stand there and he'd say, fix your feet, fix your arms, claw at the track. We ran on a dirt track, so we had the long spikes, claw at the track. And then he set up my race. He says, this is how I want you to run the race. We did 2 workouts, pretty much 2 workouts, and we did them one day, one the next day, back to the other one day, back to the one the next day. Workout consisted of a 500, 2 300s, and 3 200s. That was my half-mile workout. My mile workout was a 1200, 2 300s, and 3 200s. And we did that day in, day out, day in, and day out. But the way he had me run it is what set me up to be successful as a middle distance runner in high school. You come through the 500, come through the 400 at your race pace. Okay? And then sprint as hard as you can for the next 100. Okay? We did that. Day in, day out. 1200, come through the 1200 at your race pace, the half mile at your race pace, run the last 400 as hard as you can run. That's all we did. Okay? When I got in a race, what happened? Come through the 400, cruising, hit the back stretch, I was gone. Didn't even think about it. I just took off. So he coached me how to run a race. He taught me how to run a race, and he taught me how to run correctly. My time dropped 5 seconds in 800. My time dropped a good 8 seconds in a mile, just in 1 year. No more miles, less miles, just going about it with the right mentality and learning how to run a race. So I learned a great deal under him. Went to college. You know how college is. College is a nightmare at best. Everything's a race. You're running against freshmen that are, 5 years older than I was, from foreign countries, and they hammer you. I did PR in the 600 my freshman year and work out. But when it comes to races, it just wasn't quite there. Because it was back to the mentality that I had when I was in Colorado. The miles, the hard workouts, everything was top quality. And it worked, sort of, but I just didn't feel comfortable with that type of training and that type of atmosphere. But I stuck with it. I got through my college career. But during that college career, I started asking a lot of questions. I had association with some great athletes. Doug Padilla, Paul Cummings, Ed Eyestone. I had a friend from Ireland that came over, and I learned a lot from him. I just asked a lot of questions. I didn't go to school to become a coach. I went to school to be an engineer and go into construction and various things like that. But I learned a lot because I planned on running outside of college. And I didn't think I'd find anybody that that would coach me after college. So I learned as much as I possibly could, so that I could coach myself out of college. And those guys shaped my philosophy as well. And with various types of workouts and various types of philosophies that they had, I tried to incorporate that into how I trained myself. I had a long career. The only reason I got into coaching is because of my wife. I had a stepson that I got married when I was old. My son, he was 6 or 7 when I married my wife. And he got into running. I don't know why. Maybe because he saw me out running every day. But he got into running. And my wife told me that I was going to coach him. Okay, dude. So, I went and volunteered at Red Cucamonga High School, and that's pretty much how I started into coaching. I coached there all throughout my son's high school career, and he quit right after high school. He actually ran pretty well. He ended up running 15:22 at Mount Sac, and that's on the old course. Same course, but it just was slower back in the 80s. Hills were steeper, No, actually, it's all in the, where the gauntlet is? That's, or not the gauntlet, the home stretch, that's where it was slower back in the 80s and 90s, because that was chewed up grass. Now it's all nice and pristine. And I used to sit there as a coach going, as soon as they turned the corner, it was like 40 seconds. It was always 40 to 45 seconds when you get to the finish line. Now it's not even close to that. Probably 25, 30 seconds. That last little home stretch is quite a bit faster. But he ran 15:22, actually did pretty well. But as soon as he quit, I quit. As soon as he was done with high school, I was done with coaching. And then I luckily got a phone call about a year or two later from a coach that was coaching at San Bernardino Valley College. And he was wanted to be a football coach. And he asked me if I wanted to take his position at coaching out there. And my first inclination was no, I don't want to do it. I'm done. But my wife again pushed me and told me I was going to do it. So I went ahead and did it. It was a great blessing. Coached there for 10 years, and within the 10 years, I had 5 state championships and 7 SoCal championships in the 10 years that I was out there. And the funny thing was, one of the first years I was coaching, I heard one of the local junior college coaches state that, it doesn't matter what you do as a coach. He says coaching doesn't matter at this level. It's all about the athlete. I was like, okay. And I was like, explain. He probably looked at the inquisitive look on my face, and he said, well, we all do the same thing. So it doesn't really matter. They're all coaches. We're all coaches. We do the same thing. It's all about the athlete. I was like, okay, well, I kind of thought that, I maybe do things a little bit different than most people. At least I thought that I did. So I just thought, okay, well, we'll see. But I kind of instituted that, my philosophy with my athletes, and I think it's proven to be a very successful formula. And I know there's probably a lot of questions that you guys have as coaches. You probably want to know how many miles I have my guys do. That's what most coaches always ask. How many miles do you have your guys do? First question they ask, how many miles do you have your guys do? The next question they ask is, what do you feed them? Next question is, what kind of quality do you do? And when you taper, or how do you taper, or how do you peak your kids? And those are all questions that you guys have fielded throughout your coaching careers, or questions you may have. I learned from my New Mexico coach that peaking is more of a frame of mind. It's between the ears. It's not as physical as you may think it is. Everybody's body goes through cycles. But the mental is something that you can always hone. You can always keep it at a high level. So he taught me that you need to prepare yourself mentally more than anything. And as you were growing up, and then I was growing up, and we were all told that racing is what percent mental? It's 90% mental, right? That's what they all tell you. It's 90% mental. And it's like 10% physical. When I was a kid, I didn't understand it. Well, then why do I spend 95% of my time training my butt off and doing nothing else with the other, with my mind? But, I learned from my high school coach in New Mexico that, preparing yourself mentally pays big dividends when it comes to competing. So I work a lot with my kids between years, and that helps with the peaking. Three things I actually try to do when it comes to training. Training, I think the main purposes for training is, number one, to increase your fitness. Okay, everybody agrees with that, right? That's what we train for. And the next is to increase your confidence. Okay? And the next is to practice. My high school coach always told me, and the one in New Mexico, practice does not make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. And that's why he always worked on my race strategy and my form. And there's a lot of things that we as coaches can do to help our athletes to increase their efficiency. His number one thing is, the faster you run, or the faster you want to run, the more correct you have to run. The more efficient you have to become. The faster you want to run for a longer period of time, the efficiency plays a big role in that. You have to be very, very, very efficient. So I worked day in, day out, night in, dreaming between my ears, working on efficiency. How am I supposed to run? How am I supposed to run? Body position, foot stride, arm swing, head carry, all those things. My head carry sucks, it always has, but, I just blame because I have a big head and it just naturally goes down. But he would always yell at me, head up, and I was like, goes right back down. But, various things like that. So I always worked on that. Even when I was in college, I still worked on it. Problem was when I was in college, I didn't have a coach there to constantly remind me of when I was doing things wrong. So it took me a few years to adjust to being able to feel what my body was doing and what I was doing wrong and how I could fix it. It took a few years. But when I work with my kids, I work with that. One thing I've noticed, and you probably have noticed this as well, some athletes are naturally gifted athletes, and they can change body positions without much effort, and some can't do it to save their life. My son was one that couldn't do it to save his life. So we worked on other things. And we worked on his between the ears. And this funny story was his senior year, he was at Mount SAC for CIF prelims. He went out at like 4:45, first mile, like every other high school kid does, and you know, he ended up running 15:56. Like, yeah, that's a good time. He goes, oh, I want to run 30 seconds faster. And I looked at him and he goes, how do you think you can run? I asked him, how do you think you can run 30 seconds faster? Go on, 30 seconds faster. So I said, no. I said, I want you to run 15 seconds slower the first mile. And he goes, what? You run 15 seconds slower the first mile, you will run 30 seconds faster. No. If you trust me, just do it. And I said, you can do this. You know, and I went through it, because I had run the Mount SAC course as an open athlete several times, and I knew the difficult part of the course, and I knew where it hurt, and I knew where you had to have something left in your legs. And I said, just trust me. You get to this point in the race, this is where I want you to go. And then you don't stop. He ended up running 15:22, over 30 seconds faster than he had run a week before. And he looked at me and he goes, it worked. Yeah, it did. But, you know, he believed me, he trusted me, and did what I asked him to do. We as coaches, I think that's something we need to develop with our athletes, is that trust. You know, do they believe when we tell them stories? You know, do we have credibility to what we're asking them to do? And if you work with them one-on-one and you develop that relationship, and you get them to trust you, they'll do what you ask them to do. I remember in New Mexico, I would always run my race listening for my coach to tell me what to do. And he was always there. You know, he's always on the backstretch. Do this, do this, do this. And that's all I did. Fix your feet, fix your arms, drive. Fix my feet, fix my arms, and drive. I didn't even try to go any faster, I just naturally went faster. And that's what I try to do with my kids, you know, work with them. Many years ago, I had Jimmy Grabo. I don't know if any of you know him. I coached him at San Bernardino. And talk about somebody that had a ton of confidence in himself, so he thought, but yet very fragile when it came to his ego. Trained him hard, because that's what he wanted to do. And I remember after his sophomore year in cross country, he came up to me and goes, Coach, I want to win state, what do I need to do? And I said, okay, this is what you need to do. He goes, that's it? That's it, just do it. Started doing it, and I remember halfway through the first week or two after he started doing that, I said, but you need to do this too. And it was totally contrary to what he had learned for his previous 5 years of coaching. I said, but you need to do this too. And he goes, no, I need to do the miles, I need to do the miles, I need to do the miles. No, you need to do this too. And I wanted him to do the 2 mile repeats, just once a week, that's it. Just go out and run 2 to 3 times, 2 mile repeats, just for the winter. This was just during the winter break, you know, just to keep your fitness up and to help build your lactic acid threshold. Okay, he just went ahead and did it, and you know, came through the season. He came back in really good shape. We went to Ben Brown, and he was actually running very quick in workouts and everything. And he goes, "I'm going to win Ben Brown. I'm going to win Ben Brown." You know, and that's just the way Jimmy is. Very excited, and he went with the full intent of winning the 5K at Ben Brown. He was hanging in there for about the first 6 laps, you know, and I was just kind of watching. And, I'm not and the coach gets extremely excited. You know, I don't yell, go, 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 go. I just watch. And I think it annoys my kids because I just watch, you know, and I kind of observe what they're doing. And then if they do something wrong, I correct it afterwards. And I was watching, and all of a sudden he just went out the back door. His head went down, and his whole mannerisms just went into the toilet. And I just kind of watched, you know, and I just like, all right, you know. And after the race, I walked up to him, and it's probably one of the only athletes I've ever chewed out. But it wasn't loud, and it wasn't malicious. It was just like, you know, you screwed up. And he goes, where? And I said, this is where you screwed up, and this is how you screwed up, and this is why you screwed up. And he detached himself. And you probably have seen it as coaches, when an athlete detaches himself. You know, they're like, I can't do this, and they just detach. Okay? And I told him, you detached yourself. One point, I asked him, I said, did you honestly believe that you could come out here and run away from these people? Yeah? And I go, you're kidding yourself. And he goes, why? I said, because any person can run 2.5 miles of a 5K race. Anybody can run that far. And he looks at me and goes, really? I said, yeah. It's a no-one rule running. When it comes to a 5K, anybody can run 2.5 miles. When it comes to 10K, anybody can run 5. And he looks at me and goes, what is that supposed to mean? I said, the race doesn't start until the last half mile of the race. And he goes, all you need to do is you need to stay there until the race starts. You gave up. And the reason you gave up is because you had all these people around you and it just kind of freaked you out. And he goes, oh, that's true. So I gave him a task. And we were kind of talking about this task when we were talking about the Green Bay football game when Green Bay choked. And handed it to any Seattle fans. Good. Green Bay choked. Green Bay just flat out choked. And he was talking, and Coach Starkey was talking about the athletes are trying to do more than what they were assigned to do. You know, that back, when it comes to the onside kick, his responsibility was probably to block, not to go up and try to get the ball. He tried to get the ball. Okay? So I gave, and I try to do this with all my athletes, I try to give them a task in a race. Jimmy's task was to hold form, to hold posture. And we worked on it over and over and over. First of all, we worked on quick feet. He used to be a big loper, so it was always quick feet and posture with Jimmy. So we would work on that in workouts. Quick feet, when he'd start to slow down, I'd yell at him. Cadence is slowing. When his posture started going poorly, I'd yell at him, posture. And that was the task that I gave him. The next race that he ran, the 5K, which was just probably about a month later, I said, what are you going to do today? He goes, I'm going to run fast. I know you're going to run fast, but what are you going to accomplish? He goes, I'm going to hold my posture, and I'm going to keep my quick feet. He goes, okay. And I said, if you forget to start doing those, I'm going to yell at you, posture. And when I yell at you, posture, it's going to remind you this is what you're going to need to start doing. So he got partway through the race, and his cadence started to slow down, so I yelled at him, posture. Got up tall again and started going quick feet, and he was able to maintain. He ended up running probably about a 40-second PR for the 5K. Just because, number one, we had a game plan, and number two, he stayed engaged. He had a task, he had something he needed to accomplish. He wasn't focused just on staying with people, he was focusing on something positive and something productive. Something that he actually could measure, something that he actually could feel. And that's what made him. That's what gave him success that year. Did he end up winning state? Thank goodness he did end up winning state that year. You know, by the slimmest of margins. You know, but he actually did end up winning, which was a great for him, and pushed him on in his career. And he ended up going to Long Beach and doing very well. And now he's running marathons. But when you work with athletes, when I work with athletes, just remember that they're young, impressionable, and they want to learn, and they want to be good. So it's all a matter of what can you give them? What can you do for them? And if we go about with that attitude, then I think we'll be far greater success as coaches than what you may feel that you are, or you may even see that you are. You know, I was watching that 30 for 30 or 60 for 60s with that girl that had cerebral palsy. No, it wasn't cerebral palsy. She had MS. You know, and what was that coach doing for her? It wasn't about him. It was about her. And so it's great that you're here. That you're here learning. You want to converse with each other, ask questions, and learn what you can, so that you can be a benefit to the coaches or to the athletes. Not to you. It'll help you, but actually, ultimately, it's for the benefit of the athletes. So, does anybody have any questions? Probably want to know my training philosophy or how many miles I have my kids do, anything like that. You know, it ranges. You know, it ranges from 50 to 80 miles a week. Now that I'm at Cal Poly, they're now running 10Ks for cross country, so I have to increase the mileage a little bit more than I did when I was at San Bernardino, running just 4 miles. So they're up around 90. I was not the type of athlete that needed to do 100, 120 miles a week. I was a 70 to 80 mile a week guy. And I ran anywhere, you know, I ran 800 when I was young, and then I ran 10Ks, you know, all the way up to the 10K and everything in between. So I was comfortable with that. One of my philosophies as a coach is I don't ask my athletes to do anything that I wasn't willing to do and that I didn't do. You know, 6 days a week is all I train, and that's all I train my kids. You know, I ask 6 days from you. If you want to give me 7, that's totally on you. I just want to know what you're doing on that 7th day. But 6 days, that's all I did. That's all I was willing to do. That's all I asked my athletes to do. So that, you know, if you go about that with an attitude and you care for the kids, it'll be a blessing for them. Does anybody have any questions? Feel free to ask.